satellite imagery, imagery from drones or UAVs, and imagery from aircraft. That's a big part of our world. Way back in 1973, there was a Landsat-1 satellite launched by the USGS and NASA jointly. The Landsat is still going on. In fact, this fall, we're going to have Landsat 9 up there. Not all 9 are still operational, but there's always been a continuous record of Landsat data. The point they were making back then, and this was a bit of a hard sell back in the, the Apollo days, is like, we need to, look at other planets and moons and things, but we also need to understand our own world better. And so Landsat was directed at the world rather than looking outward. But in this way back imagery tool that you have at your fingertips, and I'm going to put it in the chat box, you've got a swipe tool. Some of you have seen these swipe tools on maps, maybe in the last few months or last few years. We've got sort of like a big squeegee, right, that you can put across a map, up or down or sideways. And you can see different themes on the left side or the right side of the map. Or in this case, the same kind of data, in this case, a natural color image of the planet at high resolution, but you've got 2 different dates on either side of the squeegee. So in this case, I've got on the left side, if you do the same thing, you can say, oh, I'm going to toggle the swipe mode, and I'm on the left side, I want 2014, and on the right side, I want 2021. Okay, so I've got a 7-year time period, and now I can see that, oh, if I zoom into this part, and we'll talk about where this might be in a bit, you can probably make some guesses. But look here in 2014, this was basically sagebrush and some rattlesnakes and some cholla. And in 2021, it was a water theme park. And it looks like a school on the north side, which was actually there in 2014 as well, but it's been modified in 2021. The point is, we've got a huge amount of urbanization in this particular part of the world. And I'll zoom out so you can tell me where it is. Where is this? Think big city in a very dry area.
Phoenix, Tucson.
Those would be good candidates too.
Oh,
Las Vegas.
It's Las Vegas.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. Yeah, that was my Elvis. Yes, it's Las Vegas. Now, again, thinking about our what's where, why is it there, and why should we care mantra that threads throughout this course. Why should we care about urbanization? Well, okay, is this sustainable in the middle of a very dry area? Also, another thing that we can examine with this same tool is there's a big lake, actually it's a reservoir, probably all you know this, to the east of the city. And if I use this same tool, I'm going to see some pretty grim changes, right, in the water body to the east of the city. What is that water body?
Lake Mead.
Okay, so Lake Mead, Hoover Dam, right, backing it up. But if I use the swipe tool across here, I'm going to see that, gosh, on the left side, the 2014 water level is higher than 2021. So again, anchored in what you know about what's going on in the West with continued droughts, et cetera. And if a city like this is getting a lot of its water from surface water, like reservoirs, if there's not enough groundwater, what are we going to do? What are we going to do going forward, right? So, and this is, of course, a repeated concern for many cities around the world, not just cities in semi-arid areas, but remember Atlanta about 6 years ago? It had a 30-day supply for 5 million people. Now, to us, thinking spatially as we are in this class, we think, what's wrong with this picture? Why isn't this like really high on people's radar screens that this is a serious problem? So water is one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, water quality and quantity. And I just would submit that these tools are important for us to understand water and build more water resiliency for agricultural areas, cities, et cetera, because this is right, it's not just the last few years been a problem. We've got whole cities around the world that are facing all kinds of water issues going forward. Okay, but this same tool though is really engaging, because with this same tool, you can say, well, gosh, I'm going to look at, I mentioned a moment ago, agriculture. So agriculture expansion in Saudi Arabia, center pivot irrigation, just like you would see in Nebraska, USA. How do those center pivot irrigations systems survive? How do they exist? It's in the middle of the Arabian desert. Well, it's groundwater. They're mining groundwater for these agricultural areas. And okay, if that's the case, is that groundwater sustainable? Is it going to be there in 10 or even 5 years from now? So here I've got, as you saw me do in the upper left, I've got Eastbourne, England. So the chalk cliffs, beautiful area of the world, etc. And here is a place called Burling Gap. Maybe some of you have been there. I've been there, fascinating environment. But look here at Burling Gap. This is one of the on the chalk cliffs. And you can see this row house that's here. That was in 2015, whatever I've got on the left, 2014. This row house here, think of England, classic row houses. The erosion went right up to the west end of that row house. And so by 2021, that end unit had to be demolished because it was literally hanging off the cliff. Okay, so coming back to, well, why should we care about coastal erosion? Why should we care about agriculture? Why should we care about sustainable tourism and water quality and natural hazards and all this stuff? With the same tool, couldn't you pan over to some glaciers in Switzerland and Alaska and Glacier National Park? Yes, you could absolutely do that. And so, you can see changes on the Earth. That's the point, that we're looking at changes over space and time with these tools. And with these tools, we can understand, what's changing, why is it changing, and then can we do anything about it? Fascinating. But here you've got terabyte loads of satellite imagery at your fingertips. Another nudge for those of you that really want to get into these mapping tools, I'm not signed into anything. If I was signed into that same kind of platform that I mentioned a moment ago, arcgis.com, you could save these images to your own mapping account. And then why would you want to do that? Because two reasons. Then you have access to analytical tools. Give me the number of acres or hectares or whatever units you want to use in Las Vegas are now urban that were formerly sagebrush. Or show me the amount of water decrease in Lake Mead, or show me the distance that the coast has eroded in 7 years in England, or any other question that you might want to ask. And the second reason is you can add additional data. So you and I look at Las Vegas and we say, thank you very much. But we know that's a satellite image in a very dry area, right? But let's say you're working with, 12-year-olds or someone in your community that doesn't really make that connection. So then you add layers to enhance understanding of whatever you're investigating. So in the case of Nevada, right, it would be maybe mean annual precipitation. You've got access to all those layers in that same mapping platform. So you can add mean annual precipitation, maybe evapotranspiration, maybe population density. You could add those layers and also have your satellite images of change, and that might help provide some context. So there's a couple reasons why we'd actually want to go up to this, if I was signed in, to this cloud symbol that lets you save the layers, okay? But there's plenty to do without even signing in, as I've hopefully illustrated. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes to look at a couple of other web maps in this platform, and I'm going to take some questions. Now, many of you love history, as I do, and geography, so taking a look at bigger changes over the past X years, here is one of my favorite tools. It's a spyglass. It's kind of like the swipe, except the spyglass gives you a sort of a, Holmes, I didn't see you on that moor. Spyglass from, not too distant past. If I move this spyglass around, I see a historical 1868 map of Chicago. And on top of it, I've got a satellite image, kind of like the Wayback imagery, although the date is a bit older, maybe 2017, 2018, something like that. But one of the things that's interesting to me about this is that, sure, I can see these different changes. Oh, I can see the Chicago River, et cetera. Wow, whether there's a big intersection right on the Dan Ryan Expressway in Chicago, there was a bunch of city streets, and the railroad still ran through there. There's a lot more railroads back then, interesting. But if I pan out, some of you probably know this, in many places around the world, we've built into the water, right? San Francisco Marina District being one notable example. And of course, here in Chicago as well. So if I look at the coastline of Lake Michigan here, notice that I see all of Buckingham Park. Maybe some of you have been to Millennium Park, Buckingham Fountain, et cetera. That was the front of these tall buildings in downtown Chicago was the shoreline. And we built on top of it. Why? Because we needed some space to build a park. There wasn't a central park like in New York City, right? So, hey, let's put one right along the lake. Let's fill in the lake shore. And we've got all kinds of, beautiful areas along the lake that you can go walking and jogging and so on and so forth, including Buckingham Fountain itself. was actually in the lake 150, 140, 133 years ago. 143 years ago. Anyway, point is, fascinating to be able to do this. And this tool exists when you get into the ArcGIS zone. You can actually construct maps like this. How do you do that? Well, you'd have to find a satellite image or a historical map. This historical map comes from the David Rumsey collection. He is a private collecting cartographer, so loves collecting maps. And way back about 20 years ago, he decided to put a lot of his private map collection that was basically sitting in his house, a big house, but online. He was one of the first to put, to scan these wonderfully historical maps into digital form. And then what else did he have to do, or what the GIS people have to do, geographic information systems people? They had to geo-register it so that you could actually overlay this on a current map or satellite image, which is what you see here. So there are lots of these kind of historical to current mapping tools. One more before we close out here. One of my favorites is, I used to work at USGS, so I do love the USGS topo maps. And one of the tools is this historical USGS topo map explorer. So I'm going to put that in the chat box as well, because you have a slightly different interface in here. But here you've got, oh, well, I know many of you from Denver, so I'm just going to quickly go over to Denver and say, okay, well, let's look at West Denver. Many of you are not from Denver, but you've been in the Colorado Rockies, and to get to the Colorado Rockies, oftentimes you travel west on I-70. So if I click in there, I'm going to see a timeline along the bottom, and I'm going to say, gosh, well, I can go back in time with, I've got a 1938 map of Morrison, Colorado, a topo map. So if I zoom in on there, I've got this capability, and I'm going to leave it up to you to do some further investigation. Before the road was cut through the Morrison hogback, you had to travel on US 40, go south, and go up Mount Vernon Canyon. If I make this semi-transparent, you can see this is where I-70 was blazed through. Why? Because we didn't want to make these big turns on I-70. We wanted a sort of a straight road for semi-trucks, etc. So that was then, this is now. Same kind of thing we did in Las Vegas. If I pan over to suburbia, West Denver, I can see all kinds of streets now, whereas in 1938, what was there? Well, there was Red Rocks Park, where some of you have probably been to concerts and gone stargazing and things like that. And there were a few roads, but there really wasn't any urbanization out this far west of Denver. There was still Denver, of course, but nothing out here besides a couple of roads. But fascinating, you've got, now this is the USGS Topo Map Explorer, so it's only USA in this case. You're not going to get the same capability if you pan over to England with this particular mapping tool. But in sum, what's where, why is it there, and why should we care? Well, I guess maybe the last thing to show would be something like this. You've got this living atlas of the world that I referred to earlier with a lot of different mapping layers in it. One of them is precipitation and other water variables around the planet. And it's increasingly tied to something called the Internet of Things, where we've got data coming in from these sensors, wildfire perimeters, traffic cams, stream gauging stations, weather stations, etc. So if we did this, we could say, well, gosh, wouldn't it be great if I could look at the not real time, but close to real time precipitation for different parts of the world. So here I clicked on the Amazon. Wow, it's not a summer and winter, it's a wet season and a dry season, right? As I pan across this graph, I see that the wet season is May, April, March. The dry season looks like right about starting now, September, October, November. So you've got this seasonal wet season and dry season. Also note the millimeters per year y-axis on the graph. So if I clicked on southern Libya, as you probably would expect, there's whole swaths of months where there's absolutely no precipitation. So then you kind of thinking about, with your spatially thinking brain, how much agriculture does that area support? How much population does that area support? Virtually none of either one, right? It's so dry that it can't support either one of those things. So having this at your fingertips, what a great teaching tool. What a great tool for just exploring, hey, what's it like in your area? Okay, if I click on Southeast Texas, I'm going to see some pretty big spikes. Why? Because we've got some big hurricanes that have roared through there over the last 10 years, right? So I've got this spike in August 2017, another one in September 2018. And of course, this is probably more rain right here in that particular month than we've had in all of Colorado for the last 3 years. So you've got this incredibly diverse planet, and we can understand it in a richer, deeper way through these mapping tools. And I hope I've sparked some, wow, I want to be able to do this. And again, use some of these tools here. If you get stuck, you know where to contact me. I've got the monthly podcast, Thinking Spatially. I've got 5,000 videos on the Our Earth channel. I've got that whole spatial reserves data blog. So there's lots of ways to kind of keep moving forward and dipping more toes into the geospatial waters. Questions, comments, complaints?
Joseph?
Yes.
Yeah, where do you find all of these different data sources? You just have to surf through the web?
Well, the best starting point is, so the one I was referring to most frequently is the Living Atlas of the World. So I'm going to paste this in the chat box. Yeah, very good question, Russ. So this isn't, remember, the world is a imperfect sphere. And so maps are imperfect representations of reality. So I'm not going to indicate that this Living Atlas is perfect data. There is no perfect spatial data. More about that in another class, maybe someday. Anyway, the point is, this site here is a curated compendium library of about 8,500 data sources from NASA, NOAA, United Nations Environment Program. So it's a good starting point.
Very good, thank you.
Yep.
Why did you decide to only do an hour over the 2-week period?
Hey, Debbie, good to see you. Notice my references to Iowa throughout the course.
I know.
Yeah, I love Iowa. I love all places. I know you do as well.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to make this digestible for busy people with busy lives, but hopefully I've seeded enough nuggets where, you know, folks that don't do this stuff, Debbie, like you and I do every day, that say, hey, you know, I can do this if I'm just a general learner, just a lifelong learner. And I can say, I want to make a map of the cool places I went to last summer, or, well, maybe last summer is not a good analogy. Nobody went anywhere. The summer before, or maybe during the 90s or wherever. And I can make maps. I can maybe get involved with some community issues in my own community. Like I've got this one, many communities have this. You've got a portal, and a lot of times it's driven by these mapping tools. My community has one of those citizen input portals. And I said, you know, as a biker, bicyclist, I identified a certain bike trail where there were some pretty big cracks that might not be a big deal if you're on foot, but on a bike, it's one of those, you know, it's just wide enough where you just, bam, you hit that front tire. And so I used that portal recently. I just wrote about this, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. But using the mapping portal, I said, here are the places where it would be nice if someone actually paid attention to these and actually did some repaving. And my community actually did that. They paid attention to my humble request, and they actually fixed it, which was a pretty cool, example of, these are empowering tools that we have at our fingertips, and actually, in some small way, we can actually make our communities, safer, and in my case, in that biking example, more enjoyable.
No, it's great whatever time we have with you, because even though I know some of these things, I still learn like 3 new places that I have never been. So, and these all really help when I'm teaching. So.
Well, thanks for the kind words. You're one of my favorite educators, and it's really, really humbling and very nice of you to be here.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks. I would just close with this then, if people don't have questions, but you know how to get a hold of me. If you don't, let me scroll up to my contact info, which is right here. I would say this: be an advocate for spatial thinking, geographic thinking, wherever you might have influence. Could be your school board, could be your PTO, could be your kid's school, I don't know, in your community. Because this is really, I think, essential for going forward as a global community. It really is. Maps are becoming sort of the language of the planet, right? As the COVID situation has taught us more than ever before. People are depending on these to make wiser and smarter decisions. So I would say, if you have the opportunity to, or maybe seek an opportunity to advocate for, this stuff actually matters, that would be grand. And thanks to the ALL for having this course, much appreciated. Thanks for all your support, emails, and for spreading the word.
We can't thank you enough, Joseph. I do see Jim has a question or comment.
Just since we're closing, I wanted to pass on, Joseph, that your Wisconsin accent was spot on.
Now, wait a minute. He does a good job with several accents and
Could have been the accent coach in the movie Fargo.
Which I've not seen, but thanks. But
the
much
original
appreciated.
Fargo.
Much appreciated. You know, that's part of what I love about geography, right? It'd be so boring if we all talked the same, if we all had the same experiences. That's what's so great about our world, right? We've got these just a wide diversity of folks, and it's just great to interact with all of you. So thanks for being here.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, folks, keep on mapping, keep on learning.
Thank you.
Stay
Thank you.
Bye.
well,
Thanks
Bye-bye.
so much.
stay safe all.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Marianne.
Thank you.
Wow. This was terrific.